I know it was really in chapter 6 that the textbook talked about alliance strategies, but there's just so much to talk about in chapter 6. I want to talk for a few minutes about alliances before we move into global strategies. The basic logic of an alliance is that you want to create some of the advantages of a merger and acquisition, specifically the economies of scope uh, through sharing. You also try to develop the relational advantages, that social capital that can enable a firm to do more uh, in a partnership than it can singly. I want to highlight from the very beginning the key to all alliances are the idea of trust, respect, and transparency. To the extent that you do those, have those sorts of foundational things in your alliances, they're likely to go better. Now, all that said, you see my little quote on the slide that says, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. You're going to see sometimes in here where sometimes companies partner with people that they're very, very competitive with, and in part they do that to make sure that they know what's going on. You can read the slide and just see the myriad reasons why companies pursue strategic alliances, and you're going to see some of these in the examples that we'll talk about later. But what I really want you to see is that they're fairly similar to what they are in the idea of a merger and acquisition. You have some idea of consolidation and horizontal alliances, some act of entry and extension with different partners, and then some entrepreneurship of acquiring new resources, learning, those sorts of things. And like I said, in a lot of ways, it's about getting the benefits of merging with another company, but doing it on a part-time basis. And then I talk about the fact that it should be less costly, and there are some reasons why an alliance may be the way to go. You don't have to, if things don't work out, you can unwind them. In fact, a lot of companies will say they like to ally with the company before they try to acquire them to basically test the waters. So, but if an alliance doesn't go well, it's not as difficult to unwind. There should not be an acquisition premium since you're not buying anybody. The idea of keeping it friendly and getting it done should be easier because I mean, whoever heard of a hostile alliance? And then the idea that getting it done should be swifter because the trust should be building. And then because you're not completely integrating the two entities, you can stay somewhat independent, and that makes it easier from a cultural standpoint. One of the tricky questions becomes, well, what is an alliance versus what's just a standard contract? I contract with this company to do X at this price, this fast, and the like. You could say that that is the shortest or the least commitment that you would ever see in an alliance. And I like the way this little graph kind of puts it out. How much are you financially committed to the alliance, and how much time-wise are you committed to the alliance? And that kind of helps you scope things, and it lets you see some of the different types of alliances. Certainly ones where you're establishing a joint venture or an equity alliance are the most binding in terms of what you're committing to the alliance in terms of capital and also time. But there are other ways to look at alliances, and that is who you're aligning with. Are you aligning with a horizontal partner, someone that's a competitor or a complementer? And we'll see that in just a minute. Are you integrating with somebody in your vertical supply chain, either a buyer or a supplier? Um, and then I think it's interesting to define franchising as a type of partnership. You have the franchise or an alliance. You have the franchisor who has the intellectual capital, the brand, and all that business model. And then you have the various franchisees who, in essence, they create an alliance. Cross border, that one kind of yawn. That's normal. And then this idea of multi-partner alliances or networks. And again, you're going to see some examples of that where lots of companies join together to create an effect. Here's yet another way to look at it that I think can be even more interesting. One is that you get this complementary strategic alliance with your partners. In other words, this would be where you reach back and you pick a few of your suppliers and develop a very particular relationship with them, or you go forward with your supplier, or I'm sorry, with your buyers. An example of that would be when the iPhone was first launched, it had an exclusive arrangement with AT&T, that AT&T would be the only carrier that sold and carried the iPhone. So in a sense, that was a type of alliance. Then you have the competition response strategy. This is when somebody's scaring you and you band together to try to meet that response. Similar to that is the uncertainty reducing. A lot of times these turn into research and development alliances, and you're going to see an example of that with a drug company on a subsequent slide. And then you have the one that people don't really want to talk about, but does happen in the real world, which is where companies get into an alliance, and in the process they ratchet down the level of competitiveness. Here are some examples of alliances that are ongoing today. Yahoo and Microsoft, I'm sorry, I couldn't spit it out. On the search engine side, have an alliance. They share R&D, they share advertising, they cross-sell their advertisers with one another, and that's a type of competition response as they are trying to meet Google's domination, and it's also, as you can see, a little bit of a horizontal alliance. Now here's one that rolls off the tip of your tongue, Alibaba and Meizu. Well, probably everybody's heard of Alibaba. That's the Amazon of China in essence. Meizu, who's heard of them? They are a Chinese phone manufacturer. And so what does Alibaba want? They want to get into the cell phone business, so they ally with the cell phone manufacturer. And then one that's a good example, shooting the proverbial warning shot across the bow, you have a failed alliance between Apple and GT Advanced Technologies. If you remember, there was a time when Apple was going to put sapphire screens in their iPhones and their iPads. And GT was the company that was going to produce that sapphire. So they did a big alliance, and it failed miserably. GT went bankrupt, and if you Google this, even today you'll see they're suing each other. ShopRunner, this is an example of a network and a competition response alliance. You've probably never heard of ShopRunner, which is a bad thing for them because this is their attempt to answer Amazon Prime. All of these retailers that you see on the slide have tried to band together so they can offer free shipping, and ShopRunner is the logistics company. The fact that you've probably never heard of them gives you an idea of how successful they've been. Samsung and BlackBerry. BlackBerry's still around, trying to stay alive, and now they've decided to partner. Well, actually, Samsung is trying to partner with BlackBerry and use some of their very secure messaging technologies. Merck and Pfizer, you'll quite often see drug companies launch joint alliances, and it's to do R&D or to cooperate in some particular type of drug development where we've got these drugs, you've got these drugs. And so they're competitors, and yet they will ally on certain points. And then lastly is one that, again, is not going to roll off the tip of your tongue, is Vistara Airlines. But that's a strategic alliance between Tata, the Tata Group, which is a huge Indian company, and Singapore Airlines to launch Vistara, which is a new Indian airline. India has a mess of airlines. They have too many, poorly capitalized, poorly run. So Tata decided we need to get into this market, but we don't want to be like all those other Indian startups that didn't know how to run an airline. We'll partner with Singapore Airlines that basically runs the airline, but in India, an outsider is not allowed to run a domestic airline, so it has to have an Indian ownership, and that's what the Tata Group provides. Here's an example of the network alliances in the airline industries. You can see there are three major alliances, Star, SkyTeam, and oneworld. And you can see what they get out of this. They get the opportunity, for example, if I take the Star Team Alliance and I fly on Delta to Beijing and I want to travel to another smaller city, then I might get on a China Southern airliner to make that connection. I think if you've done much flying internationally, you've been exposed to this where you think your ticket's on Delta and then you go to the gate and it's an Air France airplane. So they get extended reach, and then it also allows them to share some ground crews in some of the airports where they have smaller, less number of flights. It allows them to give them an entry using somebody else's staff. So very common to see that. All great and wonderful. But there's lots of risks, and we'll pick that up in the next video.